In my corporate career, spanning 30 plus years, I've had 30 different bosses, and they have come in all shades and colors, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Fortunately for me, most have been in the good category, and which is why me, Ajith Sundaresh, would like to present some of them, at least those who agree to speak with me in an open manner about leadership. What are the traits which differentiates the good from the great, and their experience dealing with various kinds of bosses in all categories. So in the first episode of the Good Boss podcast, presenting Arindam Banerrji, who's currently the Executive Vice President and Country Head for State Street in India. I have had the pleasure of working with Arindam in two different organizations across several years in the global delivery space. So let's hear from Arindam. Here goes. Leadership as a topic is something which has been beaten to death. I mean, everyone has written about it, and a lot of possible theories and ways to approach leadership. So I said, look, why don't I look at my 30 bosses whom I've worked with and try and understand how many of them are willing to speak, on this topic.
Thank you, Ajith, and it's really good to be doing this with you, given that you and I have followed each other in different ways in three different organizations, and it's probably of those 30 plus years, 15 of them, maybe 10 of them, I don't know where it is, but we worked together quite a bit, right? I think I've had my share of good bosses, and I've had my share of bad bosses, right? So the thing which I think I've been lucky, my bad bosses haven't been for too many years in my career, right? So they did last, and I moved on, or something happened. So if I were to sort of summarize in that 30 to 40 year sort of career, my bad bosses would probably not have had more than 5 or 6 years in that. So and the really good bosses were there for like 10, 12 years, and was a great experience, right? Now, I think when you think about sort of bad bosses and what they do, right? Things which come out, first of all, is that they tend to have an overbearing attitude, number one. Like they're sitting on top of you all the time. And, I always tell people that my most successful periods have been when my bosses have been 10,000 miles away. Yeah. The closer the boss is, and I've been lucky in my career that most of my bosses have never been in the same city I've been in. So I always say that having a boss at a slight distance, at least for me, has proven to be a good advantage in some ways. And you have a healthy relationship. Having said that, that we talked about an overbearing attitude. You'll also find bosses who are not necessarily respectful towards the team, right? Not very respectful about what's going on, having a perspective beforehand, not willing to listen to a point of view, and in many ways keep checking on you, right? So in our world of sort of global delivery and managing businesses globally, in the earlier eras, we never used to like when we used to be supervised in the same office in the younger part of our careers. We never liked our boss to be coming behind you and standing and checking on you every 2-3 hours. But in today's era, that means, you will end up having midnight calls for 15 minutes, half an hour every day for 3 months at a stretch. And I've gone through that, right? Where you just have these calls which are of little value when there is no progress which is expected either, right? So, but in the name of sort of or in the style of trying to be abreast, you'll find bosses being all over you, setting up calls, wasting everyone's time, quite honestly. And these sort of daily things start becoming overbearing. The other thing which I've always found things around bosses who they don't take care of your careers. The bosses who have been good do a long term, right? The boss, and we'll talk about that, I'm guessing, a little later, but the bosses who've been bad are all about short-term objectives.
And of course, one thing which I always maintain, and it's probably true, is you can never choose your boss. And the second thing, which is also true in a corporate world, is if you pick up a fight with your boss, you will always lose. So do not pick up a fight with your boss, and you can't choose your boss, right? But as you said, you're fortunate to have lots of good bosses, in your career, and for a fairly long period of time. So a few nuggets in terms of what makes them stand apart.
The most interesting thing is the good bosses that I've had, and some with whom I started working 30 years back in 94, 95, right? They're still in touch, right? They constantly act as coaches and mentors to you. So in some ways, I would say that, one of the attributes of a good boss is they track actually their persons or the people that they work with and their careers way beyond the time that they have worked with you, right? And it's really interesting when I have this observation. Could be on LinkedIn, could be an email, could be a phone call, but there are messages I get from people who've been my bosses in the 90s, even today, and when I'm at the tail end of my career, right? Some of it is the, even joking when you're retiring, but at least there's an acknowledgement that they follow you all through your career, right? So, an attribute of a good boss is that you think long-term for what is it in it for that individual and their career and what's the right thing for them, not the immediate job that you're doing for them.
And maybe, if you can sort of glean some common leadership traits, which are common, to these bosses, what would be?
I think some of them we all talk about, so they're not new, right? Which is the absolute need. All the good bosses I've seen, they've surrounded themselves. When I've been a part of the team, which I've been part of, surrounded themselves with really good people, a diverse set of talent, a multinational set of talent, multicultural aspects to it. And almost every time that I've seen the good bosses surround themselves with a team like that. And also that when they do that, they make sure that every point of view is heard, right? So someone like me, for example, and very few people know it, I'm an extreme introvert.
One wouldn't guess that, but
you wouldn't guess that, right? So as an extreme introvert, unless somebody pulls out my views, right, I won't be heard. And good bosses really know each of their individual team members and how they work and how to bring out their perspectives on the table. That's one attribute that I've seen. The second attribute I've seen about good bosses is that they're always hiring talent, which is what I call for day after tomorrow. Not what is immediately required. They're already thinking 2 steps ahead when they bring in people into their team is something I'd call out. The third one I will always say is not in an overall perspective, but all good bosses actually try and hire people who are better than themselves. And finally, the one thing I would say is the really good bosses give you away to someone if they see an opportunity without being selfish about things, right, in a ready manner in some ways. And again, this is something which not only has happened to me, I've had examples as an example where somebody needed to be promoted to an MD, right, and was the best positioned candidate in that business and the team that I was working in. But that a new opportunity came up for that person immediately. And there was a debate going on, is that why would we waste an MD promotion for someone who we're going to lose, right? And, when I had this discussion with my boss, one of the first things he said is, if it's good for him, long term, it'll be good for us. So let him go and we will continue to promote him and go through that process. So I think they think very differently, I think, in terms of it's a wider scale benefit that you look at, that I would say.
And you've been there, done that across, right? I mean, you started off as an article clerk with PwC, then as a finance exec with L&T, then of course JP Morgan, for a fairly long stint, and then Deutsche Bank again for a very long stint. then Wells Fargo, and now State Street. So you've kind of seen the full, I mean, at least for the past 35 plus years, you've seen and been through several spectrum in your career. So any unusual events which have taught you something different? You know, sounds, and obviously there have been quite intriguing stuff which has been happening, and whatever you can reveal, I mean, to the extent possible.
No, and I actually say this to a lot of people, you know, even with teams that I meet with, and I've been young students that I meet, is one of the most interesting conversations, and you probably have heard about this as well, is, you know, one of my last feedbacks that I got in one of the institutions I was in was you need to go to an acting school, right? And part of that was that till that point in my career in the mid-30s, I was a very emotive person, and it was either my way or the highway, right? So that used to create this sort of tension with people outside of my sphere of influence. And this feedback when I got was like a bit of a shock to me, because I was like, what has acting got to do with banking, right? And actually at that point of time, I didn't think about it. Initially, I was very, very pissed off. But over time, I realized that was probably one of the best feedbacks I ever got, because it taught me to control myself and my emotions in management situations where, you know, debate and deliberation and consensus is a lot more important. So, you know, giving a little bit away to get a holistic picture agreed actually is not a bad thing. So, you know, that was very interesting. But at that point of time, when this feedback was given to me, I was livid, right? And I was livid because, and it's a bit like, why is this thing coming my way, right? I can play out another one which is really interesting. Was and I've had instances of bosses asking me to hire people who they've known in the past, right? Who sometimes been, I would say, in inappropriate behaviors, and it was pretty well known, right? And I've been in these situations where, and you lose respect for the bosses almost immediately in these instances, right? When they start suggesting names with people who've had some kind of a screening check issue. And, you know, when they ask you to ignore that as being immaterial, etc., I find that like just doesn't, and that almost immediately sets you back a little bit in terms of, you know, what is this person actually standing for? Right?
Well, no, absolutely. Any regrets, you know, in terms of what you could have done, or maybe a decision which you took which went wrong? If you had done something else, maybe that could have maybe been a different result. Anything which you regret?
No, before I get to that, I'll take another one on the prior question on one episode which I never forget to relate. You know, way back, I think it was the year 2000, and in the bank I was working on, it got acquired by another bank, which is today the biggest bank, so you don't need to take names, right? But I was actually on a trek in the Himalayas, which had my boss and 5 other people with me, and a couple of colleagues, external people, friends. And we were trekking in the Himalayas, and it was a 14-day trek where we didn't actually see another human being. And because my boss was a pretty senior MD, we were asked to take a satellite phone with us, right? Now, on the 12th day of the trek, he gets a message on the satellite phone that he needs to attend this conference call, and we didn't know what it was. And so he attends on a satellite phone, and he's told that the bank's been acquired, and exactly, you know. So the interesting thing I saw then was, and we were VPs in those days, most of the rest of us, but there was a management consultant there, and there was my boss, and the reactions of people to a merger scenario and what it means to them is almost like instantaneous in terms of how they react, right? So I found this very humorous situation is that three of us VPs or four of us were actually watching two other people. One who was counting what potential consulting dollars the person could get out of this merger. The second person was actually counting the vested share values of what that merger could mean for them, but in good humor. But you come across these situations and you realize that when you get into a merger situation, it really comes down to how you internalize it.
No, absolutely, and it impacts you in different ways.
Different ways.
Multiple people. Coming back to my question on regrets.
So, my regret is that I'm always, and I've had this for the last 20 years, at every point of time, I feel like, why am I not 10 years younger? Right? And that's because, you and I have seen this industry, just go ballistic in some ways over a 20, 25 year period, and has completely altered the perspectives of where we could take our careers when we joined. Is completely different. So if I were to be joining the same job that I did the first time today, right, I'd be having completely different ambitions. So to be one regret I've always had is why am I not 10 years younger, right? The difference you can make, right? Knowing what you know now, because you almost feel like I've gone to the point where I actually can't do the doing and I want to do the doing, right? So that's one regret. The other regret I have is that, sometimes you do feel that when you have bad bosses, right, if you let it linger, it starts impacting your personal life in some ways, right? And I have had that situation, and I actually, in some ways I was in another country at that point of time, right? And I was like, I felt trapped in some ways. So but in 2020 hindsight, if I were to be in that situation again, I would cut it off immediately, right?
No, thanks for that, Arindam. Okay, now coming to something. We are sitting here on a golf course now, and beautiful view here, and we had a great round. So golf and leadership. Any lessons from golf which relates to leadership and how to conduct yourself as a leader?
I think golf is just the sport for leadership. If you ask me, compared to any other sport, this is the one sport which teaches you so many leadership lessons every time you play. I have no doubt in my mind, right? Starting with, how do you keep focus? How do you keep the big picture, how you recover. I always, I'm not great at my drives. There are days I get it perfect, and there are days I go all over the place, right? If you let your sort of performance off the drive deter you in your game, it'll be fatal. That you'll just make yourself miserable for the rest of the day. So the whole trick of recovering from a bad shot is actually massive in terms of leadership lessons that it gives. You just have to forget and move on stroke by stroke, right? The final one, the other one which we all see, right, and experience while playing golf, is it's all about fair play as well, right? Which is that it's self-discipline, ethics, that all comes into play, and there's no referee out there who's keeping a watch. Most of it, you are doing it yourself and within the sort of boundaries of the game itself. So I think there are lots of lessons in that. I think when you relate, when you're playing a par 4 or you're playing a par 5, you suddenly realize the second and the third shot is that much more important, right, than the first one. And when you realize that and you relate that to sort of leadership, is that you almost sort of know that it can't be a one-trick solution always. I go back to the point on good bosses think like day after tomorrow. It's like that in golf as well, which is that doesn't matter how each shot happens, the next shot is got to be taken fresh perspective, go in there and play it. So I think golf has so many lessons, honestly.
Play the ball as it lies.
Play the ball as it lies.
Thanks, Arindam. It's been great talking to you, and it's in a great place, and good that we could explore various aspects and facets of leadership and being a boss. Thank you.
I'm really happy, Ajith, that you are doing this, because I think in many ways these are facets of leadership which all of us go through. There's no rocket science, honestly, over here. There's lots of management books, but experience is what you try and pass on. So I'm glad that you're doing it.